Alright, so my dog is so anti-slavery. Can you hear him barking? He's very upset by this. Okay, the to understand the 3/5 clause of the Constitution, you got to start by remembering that power in the House of Representatives is based on population, right? So does each state want their population to be bigger? Yeah, they do. That gives them more political power in the House. So at the convention, delegates from southern states said that when the census is conducted, they said they wanted their slaves to count as people. Because the higher your population count, the more power you get in the House. They want to count their slaves as people. Now you might be wondering, oh, does that mean they're going to set them all free and agree to treat them like people? No, it does not mean that. It means they want to keep them as slaves, treat them as things, and yet get extra political power in the House of Representatives for possessing people that they treat as things. Northern states didn't like it. Georgia and South Carolina threatened to not join. And as a compromise, the proposal was settled on to count each slave as 3/5 of a person. Remember, that is again to count each slave as 3/5 of a person in the census count, which determines power in the House of Representatives. Now, that is not as much corrupt political power as southern states initially wanted, but it's still corrupt political power. So if you can see this bar graph here, the way to read this is you see how it's defined over here, right? The yellow would be how the population count would look if we only counted free people. And then in the yellow and red combined is if we counted free and slaves. And then the green right below for each state is what they settled on, the 3/5 compromise. So then, as you go down here state by state, any state where the green goes further than the yellow is a state that got extra political power because of the 3/5 clause. And look at that for Virginia. And look here at Maryland. When you do the math on this, this means that Maryland would have 2 additional representatives in the House because Maryland got to count 3/5 of their slaves as people. Virginia, where the slave population is much bigger, Virginia got 5 additional representatives in the House. Again, that's 5 more than they would have had if the census only counted free people. Quick clarification note for you. The census counted all free people as people. That means women, children, free black people, all counted as people. The only people in American society that didn't count as people were enslaved people. There were 2 other important parts of the Constitution that dealt with slavery. This is the one that we've been talking about, the so-called 3/5 clause. There was also this provision, which is often called the slave trade clause. This provision said that Congress could not ban the slave trade until 1808. Here, Maryland was not with delegates from Georgia and South Carolina. Maryland was fine to ban the slave trade in the U.S. Constitution. But Georgia and South Carolina, who, you'll notice if you look here, had smaller numbers of slaves than Virginia, they were like, we're not done. We want to import slaves. So they included this provision that said Congress can't ban it until 1808. Another way you might write that is, the Constitution protected the slave trade until 1808. This next provision, the third one you see here, is often referred to as the runaway slave clause. This one said that if your slave escaped to another state, you still have the right to claim your slave. Right? So if your slave escapes to Pennsylvania or to Massachusetts, they don't become free. Your claim on them extends across state lines. In Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, they list the powers of the new U.S. Congress. Make sure you memorize all these. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You don't need to memorize all these. But there are a couple that you should have a little note on. Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes. Congress has the power to regulate trade. The Constitution uses the word commerce. Most people today understand trade better, so that's what I just said. Congress can tax. Congress can regulate trade with other countries and between the states. Just a couple more. Congress decides which immigrants can become citizens and how. That is naturalization. How an immigrant becomes a citizen. And the Constitution says Congress is going to figure that out. We'll skip over several of these, but I'll try to get you to write down that Congress declares war. And if we can skip over a few more without you getting mad at me, down here in the longest provision in Article 1, Section 8, it says that there will be a district that will become the seat of the government. All right, so this is going to be the seat of the U.S. government, some district that can't be bigger than 10 square miles. Oh my gosh, do you already know what that's going to be? Do you know? We'll have to see. And then finally, down here, the last one, that Congress can make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. This one is often called the elastic clause because it stretches Congress's powers. They also designed an executive branch and a judicial branch. Remember, the Continental Congress and the Confederation Congress was a government with just one branch, just a legislative branch with no way to enforce its laws and no way to punish people who broke its laws. Well, that would not be so with this new government. For the executive branch, they created a position called the president. The president would serve a 4-year term and, according to the Constitution, could serve as many as the president wanted, or as many as the president was selected to. That's an important clarification. How to pick this president? Well, they created this thing called the Electoral College, which I'm going to try to give you a brief explanation of. The voters don't pick the president. Instead, when it was set up in the initial Constitution, it says that each state gets to figure out how that state will pick the electoral voters. So each state picks its own electoral voters through a process that the state decides. And then the electoral voters cast the votes for president. So as with the Senate, the guys designing this government were limiting the influence of ordinary people. The powers of the president, I'm going to give you even more quickly than the powers of the Congress. It's the stuff in bold. The president is commander-in-chief of the military. The president can issue pardons for anyone who's committed federal crimes. The president can make treaties and can appoint ambassadors, judges, cabinet officials. And I'll give you one more. The president can veto a bill passed by the Congress. We hit them quickly, but those are the 5 major powers of the president. Commander-in-chief, power to pardon, power to make treaties, power to appoint, and the power to veto. Throughout the Constitution, they included ways that each of those 3 branches could check the other branches, try to balance each other out. Like, I don't know, almost like a system of, what could we call it? Oh, checks and balances. That's a good idea. And the Constitution also included a method by which the Constitution could be amended so that it would be possible for people in the future to alter it. It was designed to be difficult. These guys didn't want it to be easy to change what they had spent all summer working on. To amend the Constitution, you'd need 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to vote for it. And then you would need 3/4 of the states to approve it. So, if there were 20 states, how many of them would have to approve the amendment? I see you. You're like, wait, I didn't know there'd be a math problem. The answer is 15. Right? So that would be 3/4 of 20. I just did that math in my head, y'all. Look out. Okay. The next step was to get the Constitution approved, ratified by the states. And Maryland was the 7th state to ratify. In the Maryland debate, Luther Martin, Samuel Chase, and William Paca all argued vociferously for amendments to be added to the Constitution that would protect the rights of the people. The Constitution was approved by the required number of states by 1789. And then the federal government started to take shape. People in Maryland who could vote went out and voted for the first Maryland representatives. The Maryland legislature appointed the first 2 Maryland senators. Charles Carroll was one of them. And the Maryland legislature appointed electoral voters who cast Maryland's electoral votes for George Washington. Right? So this is the beginning. The U.S. government is up and running. And once it was up and running, the Congress swiftly passed amendments to the Constitution because Maryland had not been the only state calling for amendments to be added. So did Massachusetts, so did South Carolina, so did New York, so did Virginia. So there was this real sense that, like, okay, the states have joined, but they joined kind of with an asterisk. Like, we're joining, but we're expecting that a Bill of Rights will be added. And it was. The amendments moved swiftly through the Congress and were ratified by the states quickly, because remember, the states wanted them. So the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. I'm only going to give them to you in bullet point form. The First Amendment protects what you often call your 5 freedoms. They're over here and in the text. It's religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Religion, speech, press, assembly, petition. And what this is saying is that Congress can't make laws to take away those rights. They can't do it. Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. That means if you don't want human arms, you can have bear arms instead. The Third Amendment, soldiers can't come stay in your house if sent by the government. The Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy. The Fifth Amendment, your rights when you're accused of a crime. This is the one that has due process and that you can't be forced to testify against yourself. That's why you might plead the Fifth. The Sixth Amendment is your rights when you're on trial. The Seventh Amendment provides for a jury trial in civil cases. Civil cases are where it's you versus another person and not the government versus you. The Eighth Amendment uses almost the exact same language as the Maryland Declaration of Rights, forbidding excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishments. The Ninth Amendment says you have other rights too. It does not say what those are. It just says you've got others. Cool. Thanks for that. And the 10th Amendment says, basically, if the Constitution doesn't say the federal government can do it, then it's the state's job to do it. So these amendments were ratified by 1791, and all 13 colonies that had been in rebellion together had now joined the United States and formed a nation together. Next, we're headed for life in Baltimore.